Through the marble corridors of Madrid's Alcazar floated a thick, cloyingly sweet fragrance of incense. It was burned around the clock, an attempt to mask the odors of dampness and human bodies. From the gilded vaults hung tapestries depicting biblical scenes, embroidered demons, crowned saints, and trumpet-playing angels frozen in an eternal roll call, as if reminding the court of Charles II that the heavens were watching all that transpired. But what was being prepared here preferred shadows over celestial light. Rumors of a miraculous girl reached the capital at night, when courtiers were still savoring their last sips of wine. "A child with the body of a giant," whispered the servants as they carried candles. "A divine sign," countered the monks, pulling on warm hoods in the damp, chilly air. The monarch, tormented by endless ailments and his own superstitions, flinched when he heard the chamberlain's report. Somewhere far in the north lives a 9-year-old village girl, heavy as a cannonball and growing faster than grapevines on a southern slope. Messengers promised that this little one would surpass all the jesters, dwarfs, and natural curiosities ever seen at court. The king smiled with the weary corner of his mouth, the smile of one who still believed a new spectacle could distract from the cracks in the empire and the holes in the treasury. The order was brief, like the unsheathing of a sword. "Bring her to us quickly." As the scribe affixed the royal seal to the parchment, court painters were already arguing over which shade of red would lie deepest on brocade to highlight the immense figure of the future marvel. The perfumer crafted a scent to overpower the sour tang of heavy breathing. And the tailor, with a scholarly air, calculated how much linen would be needed for a skirt to make the flesh of the little peasant girl appear even more massive under the crystalline glow of chandeliers. Meanwhile, in the distant Burgos Valley, the wind rattled the shutters of a cottage where parents were tucking their little Eugenia into bed. They did not yet know that, at that very moment, fate was inscribing the pages of their lives with the invisible ink of a royal decree. No one yet sensed that the path to greatness would become a road paved with human size. Early the next morning, the Alcazar's stables prepared the sturdiest mustangs. Stewards urged the coachman to hurry. The carriage wheels had to be reinforced with iron, for the young traveler was extraordinarily heavy. Outside the wrought iron gates, beggars stretched out their hands, pleading for scraps from the feast. Even they, accustomed to the worst, fell silent for a moment when they heard of the king's new amusement. The majestic clock on the tower struck noon, as if counting down to the arrival of the miracle. Servants moved through the halls, uncovering chairs and polishing bronze. Somewhere beyond the walls, a violin wept. A young musician rehearsed a royal cantata, unaware that it would soon be played to herald the arrival of a child destined to serve as a mirror. Beside her, noble ladies would appear even more delicate, and gentlemen even more dashing. Yet, as the palace held its breath in anticipation, one man dared to whisper a prayer for mercy. The old court physician, who knew the cost of bodily afflictions, had seen enough rare ailments to understand that behind the loud word miracle often hid pain. But his whisper dissolved in the echoing stone vault, and the sound of the guard's footsteps announced the caravan had set out for the north. Thus began a story in which velvet served as a screen for cruelty. Music gilded the grating screech of chains, and admiration turned into a cage. The sentence was signed, the path opened, and every loop of the road stretched toward the Alcazar, like the threads of an invisible puppeteer. Destined one day to lead the girl into a hall where her new name would resound louder than any choir. The old road from Burgos to Santiago wound through grey ridges, and in winter snow buried it, as if nature itself sought to hide the strange happenings of these remote villages from prying eyes. In a place where ancient beliefs in tear-stained candles and speaking icons were preserved, early on the morning of a great church feast, Antonia Delgado felt labor pains during Mass. The stone floor was icy, and when the priest cast his cassock upon it to cushion the knees of the laboring woman, the congregation deemed it a sign from above. Not every child is born beneath the vault of a church, where incense still lingers in a heavy cloud by the altar. The infant was named Eugenia, a noble name, as if trying to set the tone for her fate. In her first months, the girl grew so quickly that neighbors compared her to dough, rising by the hearth. To the peasant women, the rounder the baby, the stronger the guardian angel standing behind her. In a land where half the newborns did not survive to their naming day, plumpness was the best omen of longevity. Bowls of cow's milk, a handful of sweetened chestnuts, and the girl smiled with such carefree joy that even stern shepherds gifted her bits of cheese from their satchels. The turning point came when Eugenia turned 1, a troubling whisper hung over her cradle. Too heavy, too hungry, too quickly filling the tiny cottage. Her father, a patient farmer, reinforced the wooden cradle every evening, while her mother washed a christening gown that stretched like a sail in a gale. At first, neighbors secretly crossed themselves, but soon they stopped whispering. They spoke loudly, skeptically, as if trying to shout over their own fear. Some called the girl a gift, others a portent. At the fair in the neighboring valley, tavern keepers chalked signs inviting people to come see the wonder of Burgos. Thus, the news took its first step toward the capital. By the age of 2, Eugenia weighed as much as an adult plowman, yet stood on tiny stump-like legs, which made her all the more astonishing. She did not cry from exhaustion, she laughed, as if unaware of her weight. Only at night, when the hearth's fire dimmed, her mother heard a short, rasping sigh, as if an invisible hand squeezed her daughter's throat. Physicians recommended bloodletting. A healer suggested a wormwood brew to expel excess flesh. Nothing could halt the blazing fire in her stomach. Her brain never signaled satiety. When Eugenia turned 6, village children gathered in a circle, watching her swallow an entire rye loaf, nearly choking on the flour's dust. Some laughed, others looked away in pity, but each time she paused and reached for more, as if hunger were a melody that never ceased. Her father sold part of the vineyard to summon a doctor from Bilbao. He examined the girl, grimaced, and declared it a divine anomaly. He left a recipe for a cinnamon and vinegar mixture and vanished before dawn, fearing he'd be branded a charlatan. Another year passed until one day in a crowded tavern, a Jesuit preacher shared the story of the little giant with a Madrid tax collector. A month later, 2 riders in livery arrived in the mountain village. They politely asked the parents to prepare for the road. They brought a royal decree, a thin sheet of parchment sealed with red wax, its scent stronger than any incense. Antonia trembled, as if sensing the door had already closed behind her daughter. The caravan moved through an April rain-soaked gorge. To turn the heavy wagon on narrow bridges, they had to hack at the railings. Eugenia sat among straw cushions, dutifully nibbling grape clusters handed to her by guards. They hoped to slow her eating, but it only fueled her appetite. In every village, new gazes clung to the wagon's wheels. Old men crossed themselves. Traveling performers offered coins for a quick glimpse. But the caravan did not stop. A royal seal always outweighs the curiosity of a crowd. On the approaches to Madrid, fog mingled with the smoke of forges. When the Alcazar's towers emerged from the pale haze, the convoy tightened, as if an army were returning victorious. Eugenia, exhausted by the jolting ride, saw the palace and asked why the house was so tall. A servant, unsure how to explain, stayed silent. The ancient gates creaked, and guards with gleaming feather plumes bowed stiffly. At that moment, the girl still thought she had arrived for a celebration. She smiled, and that smile briefly made the court ladies clutch their hearts. There was too much life in a face soon to be veiled by decay. Moments later, from the half-light of a chapel, the king himself emerged, pale and gaunt, but with the eyes of a child eager for toys. He approached, studied the small fingers buried in the folds of her skirt, and softly uttered a nickname that instantly stuck to the girl like a label on the finest marble statue. No thunder roared, no candles flickered. It all happened quietly, which makes the story especially piercing. Sometimes fate shifts, not with a clap, but a whisper. Thus ended the journey and began the performance, where the audience hall and the cage became one and the same. Red velvet curtains, showers of sugared almonds, and thousands of gazes awaited, hungry for a new marvel, unaware of the cost of this sweetness. While court gossips whispered about the first audience, the Alcazar's workshops buzzed with scissors. The tailor, Don Alonso, held a roll of crimson brocade. so rich and velvety that hands glided over it like frozen cherry syrup. "Width," he barked to his apprentices, who stretched the fabric to the opposite wall. He needed as much material as would make 3 wedding gowns. The dress had to visually amplify the body's volume so that court ladies, cinched in whalebone corsets, would seem fragile figurines beside the king's new pearl. Meanwhile, in a corridor reeking of paint and oil, the artist Juan Carreño de Miranda arranged easels. He shifted them closer to the window, then farther, chasing the cold northern light that could capture the shade's oil lamps distorted with their yellow glow. He rarely spoke, only occasionally tapping a tile and muttering, as if calculating which shade of umber would preserve the moist gleam of child's eyes already tinged with a woman's weariness. But before the brushes touched the canvas, Eugenia had to undergo another ritual: transformation into a marvel worthy of Flemish paintings. The royal barber carefully combed her hair with a silver brush. Each stroke came with a faint sigh, as her thick strands quickly grew damp with sweat. To dull the shine, a maid dusted her temples with rice powder, making her skin matte, almost marble-like. The girl did not resist. She had long learned that stillness shortened the day. While one group of servants laced her into a heavy whalebone corset, another laid out sweets on the table, bowls of honey, candied dates, and a jug of thick chocolate, newly brought from the New World. The king insisted the marvel never go hungry. Spectators needed to see her eagerly accept treats, as if embodying the boundless abundance of the Spanish crown. The hour of her first public display arrived. The mirrored doors of the hall creaked open, revealing a grand space where candles reflected in gilded cornices, as if stars had descended closer to earth. In the center, among gentlemen in ochre doublets and ladies in pale blue mantuas, stood a wheeled chair with a carved footrest. Maids rolled it to the arch, and Eugenia, draped in red and white folds, was bathed in the glow of hundreds of candles. Whispers, the flutter of fans, a muffled chuckle behind a veiled mask. Some craned their necks, others turned away, as if fearing her strangeness was contagious. She felt her ribs tremble under the corset. Her breathing grew labored, but her exhales remained nearly silent. The girl had trained herself to hide any effort. The king, seated on his throne's dais, clapped loudly. Silence stretched for a moment, and the musicians struck the first chords of a minuet. No one asked her to dance. The dance was performed by tiny jesters in bright caps, circling her chair like planets around a giant sun. Eugenia's role was to remain still, yet she drew every eye. On the ivory armrest lay a silver tray with marzipan figurines. Lions, griffins, pelicans, symbols of strength, care, and sacrifice. As she delicately took a figurine and brought it to her mouth, the courtiers watched her lips' every move, as if by command. Her grace enhanced the illusion that they beheld not a person, but a living allegorical canvas. Then came the second act of the courtly play. Slender, almost translucent ladies-in-waiting presented her with bouquets of roses sprayed with orange essence. Dwarf performers juggled candies, enticing Eugenia to reach for them. The laughing king made a witty remark about nature's generosity, and laughter rippled through the room, masking the faint revulsion of some present. Behind a screen, Carreño waited with his palette. The artist had only days. The king demanded eternity captured on canvas, while the new toy still retained its freshness. The workshop smelled of linseed oil, burnt walnut, and a faint ozone from the garden's breeze. Eugenia sat on a high stool, her feet not reaching the footrest, so a velvet cushion was placed beneath them. The artist spoke softly, almost tenderly, trying to distract the child from the heavy dress. He asked her to hold a steady gaze, a faint smile. "Let the world see your confidence, little señorita," he said, but his brush betrayed his words. In the strokes hid the weariness of her eyes, the bluish shadows under her lids, and the delicate web of capillaries on her cheeks that even rouge could not conceal. While the first painting was being created, the palace already buzzed about a second, more natural one. Servants whispered, "Why remove the dress? It's the monstrous contrast of fabric and flesh that captivates guests." But the artist knew the king wanted both facets, one ceremonial, one raw, to admire and shudder in turn, just as he loved watching storms from a safe balcony, inhaling the scent of wet earth without getting wet. For the second session, the workshop's walls were draped with light cloth to keep stray courtiers from disturbing the peace. Eugenia was allowed to keep a thin silver chain with a Virgin Mary medallion around her neck. A gesture many saw as a sign of royal mercy. She stood barefoot on alder planks, the cold creeping from her heels to her nape. Carreño placed a cluster of grapes to accentuate the rosy hue of her skin with their green. The grapes were a playful symbol of abundance, but the artist saw in them weight, their skins straining with juice. Like her body with flesh, her mind could not restrain. The king visited for just a minute. He nodded approvingly, placed a gold coin on the table, and left, as if confirming, "Let history preserve this truth." When the door closed, silence filled the space, broken only by the scratch of a quill on paper, recording measurements, chest circumference, waist volume, body mass, dry numbers destined to outlive the model. In the evenings, when the court dispersed, Eugenia returned to her room, not a chamber, not a closet, but something in between. A draught carried the smell of smoldering pine from the kitchen, where cooks doused the ovens. A maid removed the heavy dress, revealing skin red beneath the corset, as if stamped with a seal. Then came a wooden bowl of soup made from oxtail and tripe, as rich as royal privilege itself. The girl ate slowly. Only alone could she temper the blazing hunger within, not turning every spoonful into a spectacle. Some nights she rose, stepped onto the cold tiles, and approached the window, through which only a sliver of sky was visible above the battlements. Far off, the city's lights flickered faintly. Guard torches, late lanterns on the bridge, the glow of taverns. Eugenia wondered if girls her age laughed there, and if any carried the weight of every breath under the scrutiny of others' admiration. Each morning, the wheel of the courtly spectacle spun anew. New visitors, a Tuscan ambassador with his wife, Flemish lace merchants, a naturalist priest collecting nature's oddities, toured the palace with a guide. Their route always ended in the Hall of Triumph, where Eugenia stood. The guide spoke in a rehearsed tone, as if reading a museum label, her origin, age, wondrous appetite, royal favor. Visitors gasped, some with genuine awe, others theatrically. As they departed, Eugenia knew that with the closing door went the moments when she existed as an object to them. All that remained was emptiness, a heavy body, and the endless music of her own heart, loud because every silence in the castle rang. Year after year, tailors widened patterns. Each new dress required more fabric than the last. Servants, taking measurements, overheard doctors debating whether the girl grew due to overeating or a diabolical heat in her blood. But no one suggested walks, riding, or light exercise. Why seek relief when her weight was part of the attraction? One day, as spring rain drummed on the stained glass windows, Eugenia overheard two court ladies arguing. One insisted that the Prussian court had an albino boy and a dwarf twin. The other sighed dreamily, "But our Spanish pearl impresses more." The girl stepped toward the door, touched the cold bronze handle, and suddenly felt she could neither open nor close the divide between herself and the world. The handle was a symbol of a freedom that did not exist. From then on, she began to fade from the court's attention, as if the palace, sated with the spectacle, started to forget her. Yet while chandeliers still reflected her crimson bodice in their crystal pendants, while the artist mixed the last drops of ochre to give her eyes amber depth, Eugenia's story continued to breathe, just enough to one day become a mirror for anyone daring to look and see, not a monster in silks, but a girl never asked who she wanted to be. Unnoticed by court chroniclers, the lavish spectacle began to crack. By age 12, Eugenia woke more often with pain in her joints, as if rusty screws were slowly tightening behind each bone. Her steps grew shorter, her dresses wider, and the corset, once enhancing her captivating size, became a leaden vice. But the court was deaf to discomfort. Every fold of fabric, every barely concealed effort of breath, only added drama to the courtly picture. One spring morning, when orange trees bloomed in the Buen Retiro gardens, The girl was brought to another procession of curiosities for Neapolitan guests. She could barely hold her head up. The weight of her ribboned hairstyle burned her neck like a flaming collar. The musicians played on, but the ambassador suddenly bowed his head and whispered to his wife, "A beautiful spectacle, but it pains the heart." His quiet remark was the first warning bell. For the first time, attention shifted from effect to cause. From that day, small signs of exhaustion multiplied. The artist's brush trembled slightly as he noticed the bluish tint of her nail beds. Her blood moved sluggishly, as if weary of carrying such a heavy load. Physicians argued louder but prescribed the same: bed rest, thick wine, and almond milk. The wine lulled her, the milk sated her, and the wheel of unseen hunger spun faster against her will. The court found a new toy, a fierce bear from Polish forests whose training for tricks required an entire troop of tamers. Fewer evenings were devoted to Eugenia. She watched from her window as the bear lifted a silver goblet to cheers, realizing the court's attention was as slippery as warm wax on an altar candle. One day it would harden and the wick would go out. The spectators thinned, the applause grew tepid, and only the tailors still brought adjusted patterns. But eventually even the fabric failed. A heavy velvet skirt caught on the steps, tearing audibly at a reception. For a moment, a deathly hush gripped the hall. Servants rushed to conceal the incident behind screens. That evening, the king ordered that our rarity not be displayed unless absolutely necessary. Thus began days of half-shadows. Eugenia woke late, not because she was rested, but because each awakening was a small battle with her body. Her lungs whispered of exhaustion, her joints creaked like an old chapel pew. Servants stopped reporting everything to the rulers. Reports grew curt. "The señorita rests." Her name appeared less often in the court journal, giving way to accounts of hunts, diplomatic dinners, and bear tricks. In the new year, as grey, wet fog hung over Madrid, Eugenia felt no pillow could ease the weight on her chest. A physician instructed a vial of aromatic ammonia be kept at her headboard in case her breath faltered. But the true nature of her suffering remained unknown. The palace didn't ask if help was possible, only that the royal routine remained undisturbed. Months later, she was no longer invited to ceremonial dinners. New guests only heard of the marvel that once adorned the throne room. The artist, packing rolled canvases in his workshop, lingered on a still wet varnish and gave a faint bow to the image. There, in slightly blurred strokes, was a girl who no longer rose to her feet. One restless March morning, as rain on the glass mimicked faceless tears, a chambermaid peeked into Eugenia's room and left almost immediately, closing the door so quietly it seemed she feared disturbing a dream. That day's inventory listed dry entries: crimson brocade dress to be returned to the wardrobe, pearl-encrusted corset to be stored, personal ornament by order of the treasurer. A long dash separated her name from her possessions, like a knife parting fruit from its skin. No lavish funeral followed. A priest held a brief mass in the chapel of St. John. Maids sorted ribbons and lace into trunks. A procession of officials passed the room, leaving a faint scent of incense and candle soot. The palace moved on. The heavy tower clock ticked off new visits, new intrigues, new harvests of rumors. Decades passed, the paint on the portraits darkened, the varnish yellowed, but Eugenia's eyes, rendered in fine layers of lapis and lead white, caught viewers' gazes with chilling serenity a century later. Some admired the velvety allure of cascading shadows, others skimmed the canvas and hurried to the next hall. Only a few paused, sensing a strange, almost physical reproach emanating from Carreño's brush. In the late 20th century, a young endocrinologist, studying a reproduction of La Monstrua Desnuda, recognized familiar signs: the distinctive distribution of mass, narrow palms, and a subtle triangular upper lip. He spoke aloud what 17th century medicine could not name: Prada Vili. A year later, an article in a medical journal reminded the world, behind the anatomical curiosity was the story of a child whose body feared starvation, as much as her soul feared being unseen. Inspired by the retrospective diagnosis, historians reread archives. In dusty inventory tomes, they found the curt note about the return of the crimson dress. In museum storerooms, they uncovered a letter from the artist, apologizing to a friend for the bitter necessity of painting the truth. Gradually, between the craquelure of old varnish and the lines of Latin treatises, the forgotten name Eugenia Martínez Vallejo came alive. Burgos responded first. In the small town of Aranda de Montes, a bronze statue of the girl in her ceremonial dress was erected, meticulously recreating every fold. The sculptor added a tiny mouse at her feet, a reminder that beneath history's clamor, a small life rustles, craving its own crumb of bread. Tourists rub the mouse's bronze barrel for luck, inadvertently brushing the hem of her dress. Thus, between two touches, a fragile thread forms, from stranger's curiosity to human empathy. Today, Eugenia's portraits hang under museum spotlights, no longer as shock attractions, but as mirrors of an era, framed by both the elegance of brushstrokes and the indifference of power. Guides speak not only of thick strokes and lush drapery, but of a girl whose gaze outlasted kings, court favorites, even the artist himself. They ask, "Do you see the weariness? Do you feel the question pulsing from those eyes?" Many nod, some turn away. The nickname dissolved into the air, and beneath it a human name emerged anew. Step back half a pace to take in the full picture. Crimson, silver, a pale face, translucent eyes. And in the silence, a new rhythm arises. No longer applause, but a heartbeat. Quiet, stubborn, reminding us that all grandeur fades when dignity is forgotten. Eugenia no longer begs for bread, seeks gazes, or waits for the king's clap. She finally speaks through silence, where the true miracle is heard. Not in the unusual form of a body, but in every child's right to remain human, even when the world hungers for spectacle.